The three of them moved across the clearing, Eddie pushing Susanna, who held the bag of hides in her lap. The pocket in the back of her wheelchair was stuffed with other items. The piece of wood with the slingshot still mostly hidden inside it was only one of them. From behind them, the bear continued to roar out its final communication to the world, telling them shutdown would be complete in 40 minutes. Eddie couldn't wait. The broken spruces leaned in toward each other, forming a rude gate, and Eddie thought, this is where the quest for Roland's Dark Tower really begins. At least for us. He thought of his dream again. The spiraling windows issuing their unfurling flags of darkness, flags which spread over the field of roses like a stain. And as they passed beneath the leaning trees, a deep shudder gripped him. 22. They were able to use the wheelchair longer than Roland had expected. The firs of this forest were very old, and their spreading branches had created a deep carpet of needles, which discouraged most undergrowth. Susanna's arms were strong, stronger than Eddie's, although Roland did not think that would be true much longer, and she wheeled herself along easily over the level, shady forest floor. When they came to one of the trees the bear had pushed over, Roland lifted her out of the chair, and Eddie boosted it over the obstacle. From behind them, only a little deadened by distance, the bear told them at the top of its mechanical voice that the capacity of its last operating nuclear subcell was now negligible. "I hope you keep that damn harness lying empty over your shoulders all day," Susanna shouted at the gunslinger.
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the polo grounds. The clouds behind the palace are looking simply fantastic and awesome. Thank you for watching.
Thin branches boinged and rattled in the stainless steel spokes. Eddie threw his weight against the handles, and they were able to go on for another quarter of a mile that way. Then the slope began to grow more steep, and the ground underfoot became mushy. "Time for a pigback, lady," Roland said. "Let's try the chair a little longer. What do you say? Going might get easier." Roland shook his head. "If you try that hill, you'll— what did you call it, Eddie? Do a dugout?" Eddie shook his head, grinning. "It's called doing a donut, Roland, a term from my misspent sidewalk surfing days. Whatever you call it, it means landing on your head. Come on, Susanna, up you come." "I hate being a cripple," Susanna said crossly, but allowed Eddie to hoist her out of the chair and worked with him to seat herself firmly in the harness Roland wore on his back. Once she was in place, she touched the butt of Roland's pistol. "Y'all want this, baby?" she asked Eddie. He shook his head. "You're faster, and you know it, too." She grunted and adjusted the belt, settling the gun butt so it was easily accessible to her right hand. "I'm slowing you boys down, and I know that. But if we ever make it to some good old two-lane blacktop, I'll leave the both of you kneeling in the blocks." "I don't doubt it," Roland said, and then cocked his head. The woods had fallen silent. "Brer Bear's finally given up," Susanna said. "Praise God." "I thought it still had 7 minutes to go," Eddie said. Roland adjusted the straps of the harness. Its clock must have started running a little slow during the last 500 or 600 years. "You really think it was that old, Roland?" Roland nodded. "At least. And now it's past. The last of the 12 guardians, for all we know." "Yeah, ask me if I give a shit," Eddie replied, and Susanna laughed. "Are you comfortable?" Roland asked her. "No, my butt hurts already, but go on. Just try not to drop me." Roland nodded and started down the slope. Eddie followed, pushing the empty chair and trying not to bang it too badly on the rocks which had begun to jut out of the ground like
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the polo grounds. And the clouds behind the palace are looking simply fantastic and awesome. Thank you for watching.
5 miles or so out of the clearing, it led them through a low, boggy area that was not quite a swamp, By the time the ground began to rise and firm up a little again, Roland's faded jeans were soaked to the knees, and he was breathing in long, steady rasps. Still, he was in slightly better shape than Eddie, who had found wrestling Susanna's wheelchair through the muck and standing water hard going. "Time to rest and eat something," Roland said. "Oh boy, gimme eats," Eddie puffed. He helped Susanna out of the harness and set her down on the bole of a fallen tree with claw marks slashed into its trunk in long diagonal grooves. Then he half sat, half collapsed next to her. "You got my wheelchair pretty muddy, white boy," Susanna said. "It's all gonna be in my report." He cocked an eyebrow at her. "Next car wash we come to, I'll push you through myself. I'll even turtle wax the goddamn thing, okay?" She smiled. "You got a date, handsome." Eddie had one of Roland's water skins cinched around his waist. He tapped it. "Okay?" "Yes," Roland said. "Not too much now. A little more for all of us before we set out again. That way no one takes a cramp." "Roland, Eagle Scout of Oz," Eddie said, and giggled as he unslung the water skin. "What is this Oz?" "A make-believe place in a movie," Susanna said. "Oz was a lot more than that. My brother Henry used to read me the stories once in a while. I'll tell you one some night, Roland." "That would be fine," the gunslinger replied seriously. "I am hungry to know more of your world." "Oz isn't our world, though. Like Susanna said, it's a make-believe place." Roland handed them chunks of meat which had been wrapped in broad leaves of some sort. "The quickest way to learn about a new place is to know what it dreams of. I would hear of this Oz." "Okay, that's a date, too. Suze can tell you the one about Dorothy and Toto and the Tin Woodman, and I'll tell you all the rest." He bit into his piece of meat and rolled his eyes approvingly. It had taken the flavor of the leaves in which it had
Good
been
afternoon,
rolled
and this is the
delicious.
beautiful Ibrahim
Eddie
Mahal,
wolfed his
also
ration,
called as the
stomach
Crown Villa
gurgling
Palace,
busily all the
the
while.
most famous
Now that he was
place in
getting his breath
Hyderabad
back, he felt
for
good.
major
Great,
events,
in
that is
fact.
marriages
His
and
body was growing a
functions.
solid sheath of muscle.
And this is near
Every
to
part of it felt at
Paradise,
peace
just
with
beside
every
the
other
polo
part.
grounds.
"Don't worry.
The clouds
Thought
behind the
everything would be
palace are
arguing
looking
again by tonight.
simply
I
fantastic
think
and
he's
awesome.
going to push on until I'm ready to drop him
Thank
in
you
the
for
tracks."
watching.
Susanna ate more delicately, chasing every second or third bite with a little sip of water, turning the meat in her hands, eating from the outside in. "Finish what you started last night," she invited Roland. "You said you thought you understood these conflicting memories of yours." Roland nodded. "Yes. I think both memories are true. One is a little truer than the other, but that does not negate the truth of that other." "Makes no sense to me," Eddie said. "Either this boy Jake was at the way station or he wasn't, Roland." "It is a paradox, something that is and isn't at the same time. Until it's resolved, I will continue divided. That's bad enough, but the basic split is widening. I can feel that happening. It is unspeakable." "What do you think caused it?" Susanna asked. "I told you the boy was pushed in front of a car. Pushed. Now who do we know who like to push people in front of things?" Understanding dawned in her face. "Jack Mort. Do you mean he was the one who pushed this boy into the street?" "Yes." "But you said the man in black did it," Eddie objected. "Your buddy Walter. You said that the boy saw him. A man who looked like a priest. Didn't the kid even hear him say he was? 'Let me through, I'm a priest,' something like that?" "Oh, Walter was there. They were both there, and they both pushed Jake." "Somebody bring the Thorazine and a straitjacket," Eddie called. "Roland just went over to Highside." Roland paid no attention to this. He was coming to understand that Eddie's jokes and clowning were his way of dealing with stress. Cuthbert had not been much different, as Susanna was, in her way, not so different from Elaine. "What exasperates me about all of this," he said, "is that I should have known. I was in Jack Mort, after all, and I had access to his thoughts, just as I had access to yours, Eddie,
Good
and yours,
afternoon,
Susanna.
and this is the beautiful
I
Ibrahim
saw
Mahal,
Jake while I
also
was
called
in
as the
Mort.
Crown Villa
I saw him
Palace,
through Mort's
the most
eyes,
famous
and I knew Mort
place in
planned to
Hyderabad
push him.
for
Not
major
only that,
events, that is
I
marriages
stopped
and
him from
functions.
doing it. All I had
And
to
this
do
is
was
near
enter
to
his
paradise,
body.
just
Not that
beside
he
the
knew
polo
that
grounds.
was what it was.
The
He was
clouds behind the
concentrating
palace
so
are
hard on
looking
what he planned to do
simply fantastic.
that he actually thought I was a fly landing
Thank
on
you
his
for
neck.
watching. Jai.
Eddie began to understand. If Jake wasn't pushed into the street, he never died. And if he never died, he never came into this world. And if he never came into this world, you never met him at the way station. Right? Right. The thought even crossed my mind that if Jack Mort meant to kill the boy, I would have to stand aside and let him do it, to avoid creating the very paradox that is tearing me apart. But I couldn't do that. You couldn't kill this kid twice, could you? Eddie asked softly. Every time I just about make up my mind that you're as mechanical as that bear, you surprise me with something that actually seems human. God damn. Quit it, Eddie, Susanna said. Eddie took a look at the gunslinger's slightly lowered face and grimaced. Sorry, Roland. My mother used to say that my mouth had a bad habit of running away with my mind. It's all right. I had a friend who was the same way. Cuthbert? Roland nodded. He looked at his diminished right hand for a long moment, then clenched it into a painful fist, sighed, and looked up at them again. Somewhere deeper in the forest, a lark sang sweetly. Here is what I believe. If I had not entered Jack Mort when I did, he still wouldn't have pushed Jake that day. Not then. Why not? Quartet. Simply that. For the first time since the last of the friends with whom I set forth on this quest died, I have found myself once again at the center of quartet. Quartet? Eddie asked doubtfully. The gunslinger shook his head. Ka, the word you think of as destiny, Eddie, although the actual meaning is much more complex and hard to define, as is almost always the case with words of the high speech. And tet,
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to paradise, just beside the polo grounds. And the clouds behind the palace are looking simply fantastic and awesome.
A story about some people who died
Thank you for watching.
The bridge they're crossing collapses. It's famous in our world. Roland nodded his understanding. In this case, quartet bound Jake, Walter, Jack Mort, and me. There was no trap, as I first suspected when I realized who Jack Mort meant to be his next victim, because quartet cannot be changed or bent to the will of any one person. But quartet can be seen, known, and understood. Walter saw, and Walter knew. The gunslinger struck his thigh with his fist and exclaimed bitterly how he must have been laughing inside when I finally caught up to him. Let's go back to what would have happened if you hadn't messed up Jack Mort's plans on the day he was following Jake, Eddie said. You're saying that if you hadn't stopped Mort, someone or something else would have, is that right? Yes, because it wasn't the right day for Jake to die. It was close to the right day, but not the right day. I felt that, too. Perhaps just before he did it, Mort would have seen someone watching him, or a perfect stranger would have intervened, or a cop, Susanna said. He might have seen a cop in the wrong place and at the wrong time. Yes, the exact reason, the agent of quartet, doesn't matter. I know from first-hand experience that Mort was as wily as an old fox. If he sensed any slightest thing wrong, he would have called it off and waited for another day. I know something else as well. He hunted in disguise. On the day he dropped the brick on Deda Holmes's head, he was wearing a knitted cap and an old sweater several sizes too big for him. He wanted to look like a wine bibber because he pushed the brick from a building where a large number of sots kept their dens. You see? They nodded. On the day years later, when he pushed you in front of the train, Susanna, he was dressed as a construction worker. He was wearing a big yellow helmet he thought of as a hard hat, and a fake mustache. On the day when he actually would have pushed Jake into traffic, causing his death, he would have been dressed as a priest.
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions.
And the little boy thought they were the same
And this is
man
near to
because they were both wearing the
Paradise,
same
just
kind of
beside
black
the polo
robe.
grounds.
Roland nodded.
Clouds behind the
There was
palace are
even a
looking
physical resemblance between
fantastic
Walter and
also.
Jack Mort. Not as if
Thank
they
you
were
for
brothers,
watching.
I don't mean that,
Jai
but
Hind.
both were tall men with dark hair and very pale complexions. And given the fact that Jake was dying when he got his only good look at Mort, and was in a strange place and scared almost witless when he got his only good look at Walter, I think his mistake was both understandable and forgivable. If there's a horse's ass in this picture, it's me for not realizing the truth sooner. Would Mort have known he was being used? Eddie asked. Thinking back to his own experiences and wild thoughts when Roland had invaded his mind, he didn't see how Mort could not know. But Roland was shaking his head. Walter would have been extremely subtle. Mort would have thought the priest disguise his own idea, or so I believe. He would not have recognized the voice of an intruder, of Walter whispering deep within his mind, telling him what to do. Jack Mort, Eddie marveled. It was Jack Mort all the time. Yes, with assistance from Walter. And so I ended up saving Jake's life after all. When I made Mort jump from the subway platform in front of the train, I changed everything. Susanna asked, if this Walter was able to enter our world through his own private door, maybe, whenever he wanted, couldn't he have used someone else to push your little boy? If he could suggest to Mort that he dress up like a priest, then he could make somebody else do it. What, Eddie? Why are you shaking your head? Because I don't think Walter would want that to happen. What Walter wanted is what is happening, for Roland to be losing his mind bit by bit. Isn't that right? The gunslinger nodded. Walter couldn't have done it that way even if he had wanted to, Eddie added, because he was dead long before Roland found the doors on the beach. When Roland went through that last one and into Jack Mort's head, old Walt's messing around days were done. Susanna thought about this, then nodded her head. I see, I think. This time travel business is some confusing shit, isn't it? Roland began to pick up his goods and strap them
Good
back
afternoon,
into
and
place.
this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the polo
Roland had
grounds.
been knotting the harness strings
Clouds
at his
behind the
chest.
palace are looking
Now he looked up,
simply
and the
fantastic and
blazing
awesome.
clarity of his eyes made
Thank
Eddie
you for
flinch
watching.
backward.
Jai Hind.
Have I? He asked harshly. Have I really? I'm going insane, an inch at a time, trying to live with two versions of the same reality. I had hoped at first that one or the other would begin to fade away, but that's not happening. In fact, the exact opposite is happening. Those two realities are growing louder and louder in my head, clamoring at each other like opposing factions which must soon go to war. So tell me this, Eddie. How do you suppose Jake feels? How do you suppose it feels to know you are dead in one world and alive in another? The lark sang again, but none of them noticed. Eddie stared into the faded blue eyes blazing out of Roland's pale face and could not think of a thing to say. 24. They camped about 15 miles due east of the Dead Bear that night, slept the sleep of the completely exhausted. Even Roland slept the night through, although his dreams were nightmare carnival rides, and were up the next morning at sunrise. Eddie kindled a small fire without speaking, and glanced at Susanna as a pistol shot rang out in the woods nearby. "Breakfast," she said. Roland returned 3 minutes later with a hide slung over one shoulder. On it lay the freshly gutted corpse of a rabbit. Susanna cooked it, they ate, and moved on. Eddie kept trying to imagine what it would be like to have a memory of your own death. On that one, he kept coming up short. 25. Shortly after noon, they entered an area where most of the trees had been pulled over and the bushes mashed flat. It looked as though a cyclone had touched down here many years before, creating a wide and dismal alley of destruction. "We're close to the place we want to find," Roland said. He pulled down
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the polo grounds.
But there's this.
The clouds behind the palace are looking simply fantastic and
Their
awesome.
progress through this zone of destruction
Thank you for watching.
was slow. Most of the fallen trees were very old. Many had almost rejoined the soil from which they had sprung, but they still made enough of a tangle to create a formidable obstacle course. It would have been difficult enough if all three of them had been able-bodied. With Susanna strapped to the gunslinger's back in her harness, it became an exercise in aggravation and endurance. The flattened trees and jumbles of underbrush served to obscure the bear's back trail, and that also worked to slow their speed. Until midday they had followed claw marks as clear as trail blazes on the trees. Here, however, near its starting point, the bear's rage had not been full-blown, and these handy signs of its passage disappeared. Roland moved slowly, looking for droppings in the bushes and tufts of hair on the tree trunks over which the bear had climbed. It took all afternoon to cross 3 miles of this decayed jumble. Eddie had just decided they were going to lose the light and would have to camp in these creepy surroundings when they came to a thin skirt of alders. Beyond it he could hear a stream babbling noisily over a bed of stones. Behind them the setting sun was radiating spokes of sullen red light across the jumbled ground they had just crossed, turning the fallen trees into crisscrossing black shapes like Chinese ideograms. Roland called a halt and eased Susanna down. He stretched his back, twisting it this way and that with his hands on his hips. "That it for the night?" Eddie asked. Roland shook his head. "Give Eddie your gun, Susanna." She did as he said, looking at him questioningly. "Come on, Eddie. The place we want is on the other side of those trees. We'll have a look. We might do a little work as well." "What makes you think—" "Open your ears." Eddie listened and realized he heard machinery. He further realized that he had been hearing it for some time now. "I don't want to leave Susanna. We're not going far, and she has a good loud voice. Besides,
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the polo grounds. And the clouds behind the palace are looking simply fantastic and awesome.
Started toward the screen of alders.
Thank you for watching.
And after a moment, Eddie
Jai.
followed him. 26. 15 yards into the trees, Eddie realized that they were following a path, one the bear had probably made for itself over the years. The alders bent above them in a tunnel. The sounds were louder now, and he began to sort them out. One was a low, deep humming noise. He could feel it in his feet, a faint vibration, as if some large piece of machinery was running in the earth. Above it, closer and more urgent, were crisscrossing sounds like bright scratches, squeals, squeaks, chitterings. Roland placed his mouth against Eddie's ear and said, "I think there's little danger if we're quiet." They moved on another 5 yards, and then Roland stopped again. He drew his gun and used the barrel to brush aside a branch which hung heavy with sunset-tinted leaves. Eddie looked through this small opening and into the clearing where the bear had lived for so long, the base of operations from which he had set forth on his many expeditions of pillage and terror. There was no undergrowth here. The ground had been beaten bald long since. A stream emerged from the base of a rock wall about 50 feet high and ran through the arrowhead-shaped clearing. On their side of the stream, backed up against the wall, was a metal box about 9 feet high. Its roof was curved, and it reminded Eddie of a subway entrance. The front was painted in diagonal yellow and black stripes. The earth which floored the clearing was not black like the topsoil in the forest, but a strange powdery gray. It was littered with bones, and after a moment Eddie realized that what he had taken for gray soil was more bones, bones so old they were crumbling back to dust. Things were moving in the dirt, the things making the squealing, chittering noises. 5 of them. Small metal devices,
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the Polo Grounds. And the clouds behind the palace are looking simply fantastic and awesome.
My God, what kind of world is this anyway?
Thank you for watching.
The largest of these devices looked a little like the Tonka tractor Eddie had gotten for his 6th or 7th birthday. Its treads churned up tiny gray clouds of bone dust as it rolled along. Another looked like a stainless steel rat. A third appeared to be a snake, constructed of jointed steel segments. It writhed and humped its way along. They formed a rough circle on the far side of the stream, going around and around on a deep course they had carved in the ground. Looking at them made Eddie think of cartoons he had seen and the stacks of old Saturday Evening Post magazines his mother had for some reason saved and stored in the front hall of their apartment. In the cartoons, worried cigarette-smoking men paced ruts in the carpet while they waited for their wives to give birth. As his eyes grew used to the simple geography of the clearing, Eddie saw that there were a great many more than 5 of these assorted freaks. There were at least a dozen others that he could see, and probably more hidden behind the bony remains of the bear's old kills. The difference was that the others weren't moving. The members of the bear's mechanical retinue had died one by one over the long years, until just this little group of 5 were left. And they did not sound very healthy with their squeaks and squalls and rusty chitterings. The snake in particular had a hesitant, crippled look as it followed the mechanical rat around and around the circle. Every now and then the device which followed the snake, a steel block that walked on stubby mechanical legs, would catch up with it and give the snake a nudge, as if telling it to hurry the fuck up. Eddie wondered what their job had been. Surely not protection. The bear had been built to protect itself. And Eddie guessed that if old Shardik had come upon the 3 of them while still in its prime, it would have chewed them up and spat them out in short order. Perhaps these little robots had been its maintenance crew, or scouts, or messengers. He guessed that they could be dangerous, but only in their own defense, or their masters. They did not seem warlike. There was, in fact, something pitiful about them.
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the Polo Grounds. The clouds behind the palace are looking fantastic and awesome. Thank you for watching.
Oh dear, what now? What is our purpose now that he is gone? And who will take care of us now that he is gone? Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Eddie felt a tug on the back of his leg and came very close to screaming in fear and surprise. He wheeled, cocking Roland's gun, and saw Susanna looking up at him with wide eyes. Eddie let out a long breath and dropped the hammer carefully back to its resting position. He knelt, put his hands on Susanna's shoulders, kissed her cheek, then whispered in her ear, "I came really close to putting a bullet in your silly head. What are you doing here?" "Wanted to see?" she whispered back, looking not even slightly abashed. Her eyes shifted to Roland as he also hunkered beside her. "Besides, it was spooky back there by myself." She had sustained a number of small scratches crawling after them through the brush, but Roland had to admit to himself that she could be as quiet as a ghost when she wanted to be. He hadn't heard a thing. He took a rag, the last remnant of his old shirt, from his back pocket, and wiped the little trickles of blood from her arms. He examined his work for a moment, and then dabbed at a small nick on her forehead as well. "Have your look, then," he said. His voice was hardly more than the movement of his lips. "I guess you earned it." He used one hand to open a sightline at her level in the hock and greenberry bushes, then waited while she stared raptly into the clearing. At last she pulled back, and Roland allowed the bushes to close again. "I feel sorry for them," she whispered. "Isn't that crazy?" "Not at all," Roland whispered back. "They are creatures of great sadness, I think, in their own strange way. Eddie is going to put them out of their misery." Eddie began to shake his head at once. "Yes, you are, unless you want to hunker here in what you call the Tulies all night. Go for the hats, the little twirling things." "What if I miss?" Eddie whispered at him furiously. Roland shrugged. Eddie
Good
stood
afternoon,
up
and this is the
reluctantly
beautiful
cocked the
Ibrahim
gunslinger's
Mahal,
revolver again.
also called as the Crown
He
Villa
looked through
Palace,
the bushes at
the
the
most
circling
famous
servo
place
mechanisms
in
going
Hyderabad
around and
for
around
major
in their
events,
lonely,
that is
useless
marriages
orbit.
and functions.
It'll be like shooting puppies.
And this is near
he
to
thought
Paradise,
glumly.
just beside the polo
Then
grounds.
he saw one of them. It was the thing that
Clouds
looked like
behind
a
the
walking
palace are
box,
looking
extrude an
simply
ugly-looking
fantastic
pincer
also.
device from its middle and
Thank you
clamp
for
it for a
watching.
moment on the snake.
Jay.
The snake made a surprised buzzing sound and leaped ahead. The walking box withdrew its pincer. Well, maybe not exactly like shooting puppies, Eddie decided. He glanced at Roland again. Roland looked back expressionlessly, arms folded across his chest. "You pick some goddamn strange times to keep school, buddy." Eddie thought of Susanna, first shooting the bear in the ass, then blowing its sensor device to smithereens as it bore down on her and Roland, and felt a little ashamed of himself. And there was more. Part of him wanted to go for it, just as part of him had wanted to go up against Balazar and his crew of plug uglies in the Leaning Tower. The compulsion was probably sick, but that didn't change its basic attraction. Let's see who walks away. Let's just see. Yeah, that was pretty sick, all right. Pretend it's just a shooting gallery and you want to win your honey a stuffed dog, he thought. Or a stuffed bear. He drew a bead on the walking box and then looked around impatiently when Roland touched his shoulder. "Say your lesson, Eddie, and be true." Eddie hissed impatiently through his teeth, angry at the distraction. But Roland's eyes didn't flinch, and so he drew a deep breath and tried to clear everything from his mind, the squeaks and squalls of equipment that had been running too long, the aches and pains in his body, the knowledge that Susanna was here, propped up on the heels of her hands, watching, the further knowledge that she was closest to the ground, and if he missed one of the gadgets out there, she would be the handiest target if it decided to retaliate. "I do not shoot with my hand. He who shoots with his hand has forgotten the face of his father." That was a joke, he thought. He would know his old man if he passed him on the street. But he could feel the words doing their work, clearing his mind and settling his nerves. He didn't know if he was the stuff of which gunslingers were made. The idea seemed fabulously unlikely to him, even though he knew he had managed to hold up his end pretty well during the shootout at Balazar's nightclub.
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the polo grounds.
This was just another deadly
Clouds
drop.
behind the palace
Not
are
much
looking
different from the heroin which had killed Henry and almost killed him.
Thank you for
But that
watching.
did not alter the thin, tight pleasure of the moment. It drummed in him like taut cables vibrating in a high wind. "I do not aim with my hand. He who aims with his hand has forgotten the face of his father. I aim with my eye. I do not kill with my gun. He who kills with his gun has forgotten the face of his father." Then, without knowing he meant to do it, he stepped out of the trees and spoke to the trundling robots on the far side of the clearing. "I kill with my heart." They stopped their endless circling. One of them let out a high buzz that might have been alarm or a warning. The radar dishes, each no bigger than half a Hershey bar, turned toward the sound of his voice. Eddie began to fire. The sensors exploded like clay pigeons, one after the other. Pity was gone from Eddie's heart. There was only that coldness and the knowledge that he would not stop, could not stop, until the job was done. Thunder filled the twilit clearing and bounced back from the splintery rock wall at its wide end. The steel snake did 2 cartwheels and lay twitching in the dust. The biggest mechanism, the one that had reminded Eddie of his childhood Tonka tractor, tried to flee. Eddie blew its radar dish to kingdom come as it made a herky-jerky run at the side of the rut. It fell on its squarish nose with thin blue flames squirting out of the steel sockets which held its glass eyes. The only sensor he missed was the one on the stainless steel rat. That shot caromed off its metal back with a high mosquito whine. It surged out of the rut, made a half-circle around the box-shaped thing which had been following the snake, and charged across the clearing at surprising speed. It was making an angry, clittering sound, and as it closed the distance, Eddie could see it had a mouth lined with long, sharp points. They did not look like teeth. They looked like sewing machine needles, blurring up and down. No, he guessed these things were really not much like puppies after all.
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the polo grounds. The clouds behind the palace are looking simply fantastic also.
One
Thank
bullet
you for
left,
watching.
Eddie thought. If I miss, it'll take her face off. Instead of shooting, he stepped forward and kicked the rat as hard as he could. He had replaced his shoes with a pair of deerskin moccasins, and he felt the jolt all the way up to his knee. The rat gave a rusty, ratcheting squeal, tumbled over and over in the dirt, and came to rest on its back. Eddie could see what looked like a dozen stubby mechanical legs pistoning up and down. Each was tipped with a sharp steel claw. These claws twirled around and around on gimbals the size of pencil erasers. A steel rod poked out of the robot's midsection and flipped the gadget upright again. Eddie brought Roland's revolver down, ignoring a momentary impulse to steady it with his free hand. That might be the way cops in his own world were taught to shoot, but it wasn't the way it was done here. When you forget the gun is there, when it feels like you're shooting with your finger, Roland had told them, then you'll be somewhere near home. Eddie pulled the trigger. The tiny radar dish, which had begun to turn again in an effort to find the enemies, disappeared in a blue flash. The rat made a choked noise, clop, and fell dead on its side. Eddie turned, with his heart jackhammering in his chest. He couldn't remember being this furious since he realized that Roland meant to keep him in his world until his goddamn tower was won or lost. Probably until they were all worm chow, in other words. He leveled the empty gun at Roland's heart and spoke in a thick voice he hardly recognized as his own. If there was a round left in this, you could stop worrying about your fucking tower right now. Stop it, Eddie, Susanna said sharply. He looked at her. It was going for you, Susanna, and I meant to turn you into ground chuck. But it didn't get me. You got it, Eddie. You got it. No thanks to him. Eddie made as if to reholster the gun, and then realized to his further disgust that he had nothing to put it in. Susanna was wearing the holster. Him and his lessons. Him and his goddamn lessons.
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions.
Eddie didn't ask questions.
And this is near to Paradise, just beside the polo grounds.
He
The
dropped,
clouds behind the
and
palace are
he saw
looking
the gunslinger's left hand
fantastic
blur
also.
down to his side.
Thank
My
you for
God,
watching.
he thought, still falling. He can't be that fast. No one can be that fast. I'm not bad, but Susanna makes me look slow, and he makes Susanna look like a turtle trying to walk uphill on a piece of glass. Something passed just over his head, something that squealed at him in mechanical rage and pulled out a tuft of his hair. Then the gunslinger was shooting from the hip, 3 fast shots like thunder cracks, and the squealing stopped. A creature which looked to Eddie like a large mechanical bat thudded to earth between the place where Eddie now lay and the one where Susanna knelt beside Roland. One of its jointed, rust-speckled wings thumped the ground once, weakly, as if angry at the missed chance, and then became still. Roland crossed to Eddie, walking easy in his old sprung boots. He extended a hand. Eddie took it and let Roland help him to his feet. The wind had been knocked out of him, and he found he couldn't talk. Probably just as well. Seems like every time I open my mouth, I stick my goddamn foot into it. "Eddie, you all right?" Susanna was crossing the clearing to where he stood with his head bent and his hands planted on his upper thighs, trying to breathe. "Yeah." The word came out in a croak. He straightened up with an effort. "Just got a little haircut." "It was in a tree," Roland said mildly. "I didn't see it myself at first. The light gets tricky this time of day." He paused, and then went on in that same mild voice. "She was never in any danger, Eddie." Eddie nodded his head. Roland, he now realized, could almost have eaten a hamburger and drunk a milkshake before beginning his draw. He was that fast. "All right. Let's just say I disapprove of your teaching techniques, okay? I'm not going to apologize, though, so if you're waiting for one, you can stop now." Roland bent, picked Susanna up, and began to brush her off. He did this with a kind of impartial affection, like a mother brushing off her toddler after she's taken one of her necessary
and this is the
tumbles in the
beautiful
dust of the
Ibrahim Mahal,
backyard.
also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad
Susanna and I had a
for
conversation
major
similar
events,
to
that
this
is
one 2 days
marriages
ago.
and functions.
Me, Susanna.
And this is near to
Nodded.
Paradise, just beside
Roland's
the
of the
polo
opinion that
grounds.
apprentice gunslingers who won't
Clouds
bite the
behind the
hand that
palace are
feeds them
looking
from time to time need a good kick in the
fantastic at
slats.
this. Thank
Eddie
you
looked
for
around
watching.
at the wreckage and slowly began to beat the bone dust out of his pants and shirt. "What if I told you I don't want to be a gunslinger, Roland, old buddy? I'd say that what you want doesn't much matter." Roland was looking at the metal kiosk which stood against the rock wall and seemed to have lost interest in the conversation. Eddie had seen this before. When the conversation turned to questions of should be, could be, or ought to be, Roland almost always lost interest. "Ka?" Eddie asked, with a trace of his old bitterness. "That's right. Ka." Roland walked over to the kiosk and passed a hand along the yellow and black stripes which ran down its front. "We have found one of the 12 portals which ring the edge of the world. One of the 6 paths to the Dark Tower. And that is also Ka." "27. Eddie went back for Susanna's wheelchair. No one had to ask him to do this. He wanted some time alone, to get himself back under control. Now that the shooting was over, every muscle in his body seemed to have picked up its own little thrumming tremor. He did not want either of them to see him this way, not because they might misread it as fear, but because one or both might know it for what it really was: excitement overload. He had liked it. Even when you added in the bat which had almost scalped him, he had liked it. That's bullshit, buddy. And you know it. The trouble was, he didn't know it. He had come face to face with something Susanna had found out for herself after shooting the bear. He could talk about how he didn't want to be a gunslinger, how he didn't want to be tramping around this crazy world where the 3 of them seemed to be the only human life, that what he really wanted more than anything else was to be standing on the corner of Broadway and 42nd Street, popping his fingers, munching a chili dog, and listening to Creedence Clearwater Revival blast out of his walking earphones as he watched the girls
the
go
most
by,
famous
those ultimately
place in
sexy
Hyderabad
New York
for
girls with
major
their pouty
events,
go-to-hell
that is
mouths and their
marriages
long
and
legs and
functions.
short skirts.
And this is near to
He could talk about
Paradise,
those things
just
until he
beside
was
the
blue in
polo
the
grounds.
face.
And the clouds
But his
behind the
heart
palace are
knew
looking
other things.
simply fantastic and
It
awesome.
knew that he had enjoyed
Thank you
blowing
for
the
watching.
electronic menagerie back to glory, at least while the game was on, and Roland's gun was his own private handheld thunderstorm. He had enjoyed kicking the robot rat, even though it had hurt his foot and even though he had been scared shitless. In some weird way, that part, the being scared part, actually seemed to add to the enjoyment. All that was bad enough, but his heart knew something even worse, that if a door leading back to New York appeared in front of him right now, he might not walk through it. Not, at least, until he had seen the Dark Tower for himself. He was beginning to believe that Roland's illness was a communicable disease. As he wrestled Susanna's chair through the tangle of junk alders, cursing the branches that whipped at his face and tried to poke his eyes out, Eddie found himself able to admit at least some of these things, and the admission cooled his blood a little. I want to see if it looks the way it did in my dream, he thought. To see something like that, that would be really fantastic. And another voice spoke up inside. I'll bet his other friends, the ones with the names that sound like they came straight from the Round Table in King Arthur's court, I'll bet they felt the same way, Eddie. And they're all dead. Every one of them. He recognized that voice, like it or not. It belonged to Henry, and that made it a hard voice not to hear. 28. Roland, with Susanna balanced on his right hip, was standing in front of the metal box that looked like a subway entrance closed for the night. Eddie left the wheelchair at the edge of the clearing and walked over. As he did, the steady humming noise and the vibration under his feet became louder. The machinery making the noise, he realized, was either inside the box or under it. It seemed that he heard it not with his ears, but somewhere deep inside his head, and in the hollows of his gut.
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions.
Or everywhere.
And this is near to Paradise, just beside the polo grounds.
Surely you both have realized
Clouds behind the palace are looking
simply
fantastic and awesome.
Because the world has
Thank you
moved on.
for watching.
Yes.
Jai.
Roland glanced at him. Here, that is not a figure of speech. The world really is moving on, and it goes ever faster. At the same time, things are wearing out, falling apart. He kicked the mechanical corpse of the walking box to illustrate his point. Eddie thought of the rough diagram of the portals which Roland had drawn in the dirt. "Is this the edge of the world?" he asked, almost timidly. "I mean, it doesn't look much different than any place else." He laughed a little. "If there's a drop-off, I don't see it." Roland shook his head. "It's not that kind of edge. It's the place where one of the beams starts, or so I was taught." "Beams?" Susanna asked. "What beams?" "The great old ones didn't make the world, but they did remake it. Some tale-tellers say the beams saved it. Others say they are the seeds of the world's destruction. The great old ones created the beams. They are lines of some sort, lines which bind and hold." "Are you talking about magnetism?" Susanna asked cautiously. His whole face lit up, transforming its harsh planes and furrows into something new and amazing. And for a moment Eddie knew how Roland would look if he actually did reach his tower. Yes, not just magnetism, but that is a part of it, and gravity, and the proper alignment of space, size, and dimension. The beams are the forces which bind these things together. "Welcome to physics in the nut house," Eddie said in a low voice. Susanna ignored this. "And the Dark Tower? Is it some kind of generator, a central power source for these beams?" "I don't know." "But you do know that this is point A," Eddie said. "If we walked long enough in a straight line, we'd come to another portal, call it point C, on the other edge of the world. But before we did..."
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the polo grounds.
The
clouds behind the palace are looking simply
now he
fantastic
straightened
and
up
awesome.
and stared at Roland.
Thank you for
"That
watching.
can't be."
Jai.
He sounded like a man trying to explain to a small child that there really isn't a boogeyman living in his closet, that there can't be because there isn't any such thing as the boogeyman, not really. Worlds don't grow, Roland. Don't they? When I was a boy, Eddie, there were maps. I remember one in particular. It was called the Greater Kingdoms of the Western Earth. It showed my land, which was called by the name Gilead. It showed the downland baronies, which were overrun by riot and civil war in the year after I won my guns, and the hills and the desert, and the mountains and the western sea. It was a long distance from Gilead to the western sea, 1,000 miles or more, but it had taken me over 20 years to cross that distance. "That's impossible," Susanna said quickly, fearfully. "Even if you walked the whole distance, it couldn't take 20 years. "Well, you have to allow for stops to write postcards and drink beer," Eddie said, but they both ignored him. "I didn't walk, but rode most of the distance on horseback," Roland said. "I was slowed up, shall we say, every now and then, but for most of that time I was moving away from John Farson, who led the revolt which toppled the world I grew up in and who wanted my head on a pole in his courtyard. He had good reason to want that, I suppose, since I and my compatriots were responsible for the deaths of a great many of his followers. And because I stole something he held very dear." "What, Roland?" Eddie asked curiously. Roland shook his head. "That's a story for another day, or maybe never. For now, think not of that, but of this. I've come many thousands of miles, because the world is growing." "A thing like that just can't happen," Eddie reiterated, but he was badly shaken all the same. "There'd be earthquakes, floods, tidal waves.
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the Polo Grounds. The clouds behind the palace are looking fantastic also. Thank you for watching.
Eddie, who caught it with his left hand. The snake broke in 2 pieces as he did so. "You see, it's exhausted. All the creatures we found here were exhausted. If we hadn't come, they would have died before long anyway, just as the bear would have died." "The bear had some sort of disease," Susanna said. The gunslinger nodded. "Parasites, which attack the natural parts of its body. But why did they never attack it before?" Susanna did not reply. Eddie was examining the snake. Unlike the bear, it appeared to be a totally artificial construction, a thing of metal, circuits, and yards, or maybe miles, of gossamer-thin wire. Yet he could see flecks of rust, not just on the surface of the half-snake he still held, but in its guts as well. And there was a patch of wetness, where either oil had leaked out or water had seeped in. This moisture had rotted away some of the wires, and a greenish stuff that looked like moss had grown over several of the thumbnail-sized circuit boards. Eddie turned the snake over. A steel plate proclaimed it to be the work of North Central Positronics Limited. There was a serial number, but no name. "Probably too unimportant to name," he thought. "Just a sophisticated mechanical roto-rooter designed to give old Brer Bear an enema every once in a while, keep him regular, or something equally disgusting." He dropped the snake and wiped his hands on his pants. Roland had picked up the tractor gadget. He yanked at one of the treads. It came off easily, showering a cloud of rust down between his boots. He tossed it aside. "Everything in the world is either coming to rest or falling to pieces," he said flatly. "At the same time, the forces which interlock and give the world its coherence, in time and size as well as in space, are weakening. We knew that even as children, but we had no idea what the time of the end would be like. How could we? Yet now I am living in those times, and I don't believe they affect my world alone. They affect yours, Eddie.
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events, that is marriages and functions.
Come, draw close.
And this is near to Paradise, just beside the Polo Grounds.
The metal box with
the clouds behind the palace are looking
slashes of yellow and black. A strong and unpleasant memory seized him. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking of a crumbling Victorian wreck in Dutch Hill, about a mile away from the neighborhood where he and Henry had grown up. This wreck, which was known as the Mansion to the neighborhood kids, occupied a plot of weedy, untended lawn on Reinhold Street. Eddie guessed that practically all the kids in the borough had heard spooky stories about the mansion. The house stood, slumped beneath its steep roof, seeming to glare at passers-by from the deep shadows thrown by its eaves. The windows were gone, of course. Kids can throw rocks through windows without getting too close to a place. But it had not been spray-painted, and it had not become a make-out spot or a shooting gallery. Oddest of all was the simple fact of its continued existence. No one had set it on fire to collect the insurance or just to see it burn. The kids said it was haunted, of course, and as Eddie stood on the sidewalk with Henry one day, looking at it, they had made the pilgrimage specifically to see this object of fabulous rumor. Although Henry had told their mother they were only going for hoodsy rockets at Dahlberg's with some of his friends, it had seemed that it really might be haunted. Hadn't he felt some strong and unfriendly force seeping from that old Victorian shadowy windows that seemed to look at him with the fixed stare of a dangerous lunatic? Hadn't he felt some subtle wind stirring the hairs on his arms and the back of his neck? Hadn't he had the clear intuition that if he stepped inside that place, the door would slam and lock behind him, and the walls would begin to close in, grinding the bones of dead mice to powder, wanting to crush his bones the same way? Haunting. Haunted. He felt that same old sense of mystery and danger now as he approached the metal box. Goose flesh began to ripple up his legs and down his arms. The hair on the back of his neck bushed out and became rough, overlapping hackles. He felt that same subtle wind blowing past him, although the leaves on the trees which ringed the clearing were
Good
perfectly
afternoon,
still.
and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal,
Yet he walked
also
toward
called
the
as the
door
Crown
anyway,
Villa Palace,
for that was what it was,
the
of
most
course,
famous
another door,
place in
although this one was locked and
Hyderabad
always would
for
be
major
against the likes
events,
of
that
him,
is
not
marriages and
stopping until his
functions.
ear was pressed against
And this
it.
is near to Paradise, just
It was
beside
as
the
if he
Polo
had dropped
Grounds.
a tab of really strong
clouds
acid
behind the
half
palace
an
are
hour
looking
ago, and it was just
simply
beginning to come
fantastic
on
also.
heavy. Strange
Thank you for
colors
watching.
flowed across the darkness behind his eyeballs. He seemed to hear voices murmuring up to him from long hallways like stone throats, halls which were lit with guttering electric torches. Once these flambeaux of the modern age had thrown a bright glare across everything, but now they were only sullen cores of blue light. He sensed emptiness, desertion, desolation, death. The machinery rumbled on, but wasn't there a rough undertone to the sound, a kind of desperate thudding beneath the hum, like the arrhythmia of a diseased heart? A feeling that the machinery producing this sound, although far more sophisticated even than that within the bear had been, was somehow falling out of tune with itself? All is silent in the halls of the dead, Eddie heard himself whisper in a falling, fainting voice. All is forgotten in the stone halls of the dead. Behold the stairways which stand in darkness. Behold the rooms of ruin. These are the halls of the dead, where the spiders spin and the great circuits fall quiet one by one. Roland pulled him roughly back, and Eddie looked at him with dazed eyes. "That's enough," Roland said. "Whatever they put in there isn't doing so well, is it?" Eddie heard himself ask. His trembling voice seemed to come from far away. He could still feel the power coming out of that box. It called to him. "No, nothing in my world is doing so well these days." "If you boys are planning to camp here for the night, you'll have to do without the pleasure of my company," Susanna said. Her face was a white blur in the ashy aftermath of twilight. "I'm going over yonder. I don't like the way that thing makes me feel." "We'll all camp over yonder," Roland said. "Let's go." "What a good idea," Eddie said. As they moved away from the box, the sound
Good
of the
afternoon,
machinery
and this
began
is
to
the
dim.
beautiful Ibrahim
Eddie felt its
Mahal,
hold
also
on him
called as the
weakening,
Crown Villa
although it
Palace,
still called to him,
the most
invited him
famous
to explore
place
the
in
half-lit
Hyderabad
hallways,
for
the standing
major events, that
stairways,
is
the
marriages
rooms
and
of ruin
functions.
where the spiders spun,
And this is
and
near
the
to
control
Paradise,
panels were
just
going
beside
dark,
the Polo Grounds.
one by one.
The clouds behind the palace are looking simply fantastic and awesome. Thank you for watching.
29.
Jai Hind.
In his dream that night, Eddie again went walking down 2nd Avenue toward Tom and Jerry's Artistic Deli on the corner of 2nd and 46th. He passed a record store, and the Rolling Stones boomed from the speakers. I see a red door and I want to paint it black. No colors anymore, I want them to turn black. I see the girls walk by dressed in their summer clothes. I have to turn my head until my darkness goes. He walked on, passing a store called Reflections of You between 49th and 48th. He saw himself in one of the mirrors hanging in the display window. He thought he looked better than he had in years. Hair a little too long, but otherwise tanned and fit. The clothes, though, man, square bear shit all the way. Blue blazer, white shirt, dark red tie, gray dress pants. He had never owned a yuppie from hell outfit like that in his life. Someone was shaking him. Eddie tried to burrow deeper into the dream. He didn't want to wake up now, not before he got to the deli and used his key to go through the door and into the field of roses. He wanted to see it all again, the endless blanket of red, the overarching blue sky where those great white cloud ships sailed, and the dark tower. He was afraid of the darkness which lived within that eldritch column, waiting to eat anyone who got too close, but he wanted to see it again just the same, needed to see it. The hand, however, would not stop shaking. The dream began to darken, and the smells of car exhaust along 2nd Avenue became the smell of wood smoke, thin now because the fire was almost out. It was Susanna. She looked scared. Eddie sat up and put an arm around her. They had camped on the far side of the alder grove, within earshot of the stream babbling through the bone-littered clearing. On the other side of the glowing embers which had been their campfire, Roland lay asleep. His sleep was not easy. He had cast aside his single blanket and lay with his knees drawn up almost to his chest. With his boots
Good
off,
afternoon,
his
and
feet
this is the
looked
beautiful
white and
Ibrahim
narrow and
Mahal,
defenseless.
also called as the
The
Crown
great
Villa
toe of
Palace,
the right foot
the
was
most
gone,
famous
victim of the
place in
lobster thing,
Hyderabad
which had also
for
snatched away part
major
of his right
events,
hand.
that is marriages and
He was
functions.
moaning some slurred
And this is near to
phrase
Paradise,
over and over
just
again.
beside the Polo Grounds.
After a few repetitions,
The clouds
Eddie
behind
realized
the
it was
palace
the
are
phrase
looking
he had spoken before
simply
keeling
fantastic
over in the
also.
clearing where Susanna had shot the bear.
Thank you for watching.
Go then.
Jai.
There are other worlds than these. He would fall silent for a moment, then call out the boy's name. Jake! Where are you? Jake! The desolation and despair in his voice filled Eddie with horror. His arms stole around Susanna, and he pulled her tight against him. He could feel her shivering, although the night was warm. The gunslinger rolled over. Starlight fell into his open eyes. Jake! Where are you? He called to the night. Come back! Oh, Jesus, he's off again. What should we do, Suze? I don't know. I just knew I couldn't listen to it any more by myself. He sounds so far away from everything. Go then, the gunslinger murmured, rolling back onto his side and drawing his knees up once more. There are other worlds than these. He was silent for a moment. Then his chest hitched, and he loosed the boy's name in a long, blood-curdling cry. In the woods behind them, some large bird flew away in a dry whir of wings toward some less exciting part of the world. Do you have any ideas? Susanna asked. Her eyes were wide and wet with tears. Maybe we should wake him up? I don't know. Eddie saw the gunslinger's revolver, the one he wore on his left hip. It had been placed in its holster on a neatly folded square of hide within easy reach of the place where Roland lay. I don't think I dare, he added at last. It's driving him crazy. Eddie nodded. What do we do about it? Eddie, what do we do? Eddie didn't know. An antibiotic had stopped the infection caused by the bite of the lobster thing. Now Roland was burning with infection again. But Eddie didn't think there was an antibiotic in the world that would cure what was wrong with him this time. I don't know. Lie down with me, Suze. Eddie threw a hide.
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events such as marriages and functions. And this is near to Paradise, just beside the Polo Grounds. The clouds behind the palace are looking simply fantastic also. Thank you for watching.
Eddie's eyes moved to the revolver, lying so close to the gunslinger's good left hand, and he remembered again how fast Roland had been when he'd seen the mechanical bat swooping down toward them, so fast his hand had seemed to disappear. If the gunslinger went mad, and if he and Susanna became the focus of that madness, they would have no chance. No chance at all. He pressed his face into the warm hollow of Susanna's neck and closed his eyes. Not long after, Roland ceased his babbling. Eddie raised his head and looked over. The gunslinger appeared to be sleeping naturally again. Eddie looked at Susanna and saw that she had also gone to sleep. He lay down beside her, gently kissed the swell of her breast, and closed his own eyes. "Not you, buddy. You're going to be awake a long, long time." But they had been on the move for 2 days, and Eddie was bone-tired. He drifted off, drifted down. "Back to the dream," he thought as he went. "I want to go back to 2nd Avenue, back to Tom and Jerry's. That's what I want." The dream did not return that night, however. 30. They ate a quick breakfast as the sun came up, repacked and redistributed the gear, and then returned to the wedge-shaped clearing. It didn't look quite so spooky in the clear light of morning, but all three of them were still at pains to keep well away from the metal box with its warning slashes of black and yellow. If Roland had any recollection of the bad dreams which had haunted him in the night, he gave no sign. He had gone about the morning chores as he always did, in thoughtful, stolid silence. "How do you plan to keep to a straight-line course from here?" Susanna asked the gunslinger. "If the legends are right, that should be no problem. You remember when you asked about magnetism?" She nodded. He rummaged deep into his purse and at last emerged with a small square of old
Good afternoon, and this is the beautiful Ibrahim Mahal, also called as the Crown Villa Palace, the most famous place in Hyderabad for major events such as marriages and
"I know what they
functions.
are, of course, but
And this is
these
near
days I
to
keep my
Paradise,
directions by
just
the
beside
sun
the
and
Polo
stars.
Grounds.
Even
The clouds
now,
behind the palace are
you
looking
serve me quite well.
simply fantastic and awesome.
Even now,"
Thank you
Susanna
for
asked,
watching.
a trifle uneasily.
Jay.
He nodded. "The directions of the world are also in drift." "Christ," Eddie said. He tried to imagine a world where true north was slipping slyly off to the east or west, and gave up almost at once. It made him feel a little ill. The way looking down from the top of a high building had always made him feel a little ill. "This is just a needle, but it is steel, and it should serve our purpose as well as a compass. The beam is our course now, and the needle will show it." He rummaged in his purse again and came out with a poorly made pottery cup. A crack ran down one side. Roland had mended this artifact which he had found at the old campsite with pine gum. Now he went to the stream, dipped the cup into it, and brought it back to where Susanna sat in her wheelchair. He put the cup down carefully on the wheelchair's arm, and when the surface of the water inside was calm, he dropped the needle in. It sank to the bottom and rested there. "Wow!" Eddie said. "Great! I'd fall at your feet in wonder, Roland, but I don't want to spoil the crease of my pants." "I'm not finished. Hold the cup steady, Susanna." She did, and Roland pushed her slowly across the clearing. When she was about 12 feet in front of the door, he turned the chair carefully so she was facing away from it. "Eddie!" she cried. "Look at this!" He bent over the pottery cup, marginally aware that water was already oozing through Roland's makeshift seal. The needle was rising slowly to the surface. It reached it and bobbed there as serenely as a cork would have done. Its direction lay in a straight line from the portal behind them and into the old, tangled forest ahead. "Holy shit! A floating needle! Now I really have seen everything." "Hold the cup, Susanna." She held it steady as Roland pushed the wheelchair further into the clearing, at right angles to the box. The needle lost its steady point, bobbed randomly for a moment, then sank to the bottom of the cup again. When Roland pulled the chair backward
and this
to
is
its
the
former
beautiful
spot,
Ibrahim
it rose
Mahal,
once more
also
and
called as
pointed
the
away.
Crown Villa Palace,
If
the
we had
most
iron
famous
filings
place
and
in
a sheet of paper,
Hyderabad
the
for
gunslinger said,
major
we could
events,
scatter the
that is
filings on the
marriages
paper's
and
surface and
functions.
watch them draw together into a line
And this is
which
near
would point
to
that
Paradise,
same course.
just beside the polo grounds.
Will that happen even when
The
we
clouds
leave the
behind the
portal?
palace are
Eddie
looking
asked.
simply fantastic.
Roland nodded. Nor is that all.
Thank you for
We
watching.
can actually see the beam.
Jai.
Susanna looked over her shoulder. Her elbow bumped the cup a little as she did. The needle swung aimlessly as the water inside sloshed, and then settled firmly back in its original direction. "Not that way," Roland said. "Look down, both of you, Eddie at your feet, Susanna into your lap." They did as he asked. "When I tell you to look up, look straight ahead, in the direction the needle points. Don't look at any one thing. Let your eyes see whatever it will. Now, look up." They did. For a moment Eddie saw nothing but the woods. He tried to make his eyes relax, and suddenly it was there, the way the shape of the slingshot had been there inside the knob of wood, and he knew why Roland had told them not to look at any one thing. The effect of the beam was everywhere along its course, but it was subtle. The needles of the pines and spruces pointed that way. The greenberry bushes grew slightly slanted, and the slant lay in the direction of the beam. Not all the trees the bear had pushed down to clear its sightlines had fallen along that camouflaged path, which ran southeast if Eddie had his directions right, but most had, as if the force coming out of the box had pushed them that way as they tottered. The clearest evidence was in the way the shadows lay on the ground. With the sun coming up in the east, they all pointed west, of course, but as Eddie looked southeast, he saw a rough herringbone pattern that existed only along the line which the needle in the cup had pointed out. "I might see something," Susanna said doubtfully, "but look at the shadows. The shadows, Suze." Eddie saw her eyes widen as it all fell into place for her. "My God! It's there! Right there! It's like when someone has a natural part in their hair." Now that Eddie had seen it, he could not unsee it. A dim aisle driving through the untidy tangle which surrounded the clearing, a straight-edge course that was the way of the beam.
Good afternoon, and this is